Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another very exciting Civilizations in Review. We're here with content writer extraordinaire Andy Mendez to chat all about the Funj Sultanate. And with me, as usual, is Ana Campuzano, our fabulous co-moderator extraordinaire. Both of you are extraordinaire, honestly, you really are. It's going to be a very great conversation today. For those tuning in on Facebook, hi, nice to see you all. We will also be live streaming and posting this later to our YouTube, our website, our Spotify, and our Instagram. So you can engage with this fabulous conversation in all of those places. I will say the best place to go, though, is our website itself, alfuzaic.net, Civilizations 101, and then scroll down to Funj, because the majority of the documents, all the hyperlinks, the information, all come from this one individual article about this ancient empire. I'll take it to Ana to start reading the 101 word intro and begin this conversation, but just thank you all for being here. Excited to learn more. Take it away, Ana.
Thanks, Ben, and welcome, Andy. So this is the Funj. The emergence of the Funj Sultanate completely altered the existing power dynamics between the Ottoman Empire and Ethiopia in the 16th, 18th century. The Funj established their capital city at Sennar, a port along the banks of the Blue Nile in what is now northeastern Sudan, where they maintained tight control over a flourishing trade of gold and slaves. Under Funj rule, Islam spread, and it is still the dominant religion in modern-day Sudan. For nearly 300 years, the Funj presence in the region frustrated Ottoman attempts at southern expansion until they succumbed to an invasion led by Egypt's viceroy, Muhammad Ali. So I'm sure most of us heard this name, but I want to start at the beginning. So I really think when I think about Ethiopia, I always think about this really powerful sort of empire that was, there at the time. And to kind of have that dynamic between the Ottoman, it's just like, wow, to like really powerful empires and now nations. So how was like that in the history of what Ethiopia represented for the Horn of Africa and then the Ottoman Empire sort of in the Middle Eastern region?
Sure. I would say that most historians really express a lot of surprise in terms of how the Funj kind of seemed to come out of nowhere. And are very effective at changing the power dynamics in the region. Like you said, the Ottomans and the Ethiopians are already pretty established. And so the fact that they could kind of come on the scene very quickly and really shake things up and pose a really significant threat to Ottoman expansion, while also thwarting sort of Ethiopia's desire to sort of spread Christian influence. So most people just seem to be pretty amazed that they're able to do that. I think, and that's particularly because no one's really sure where they came from. There are three primary competing theories about where they came from. Some people think they came from Abyssinia. Some people think that they, like this refugee prince, was trying to escape and settled at Sennar, and other people think that they were like a neighboring war band. Most people, there's starting to be some more criticism about why all of the theories seem to think that they couldn't have been native to the region. Like, why couldn't they have been inheritors of some of the institutions that were already there? But the fact that there's so much obscurity in their origins just makes it even more surprising for historians that they were able to achieve what they were able to achieve and last for 300 years.
That's really fascinating. I didn't realize there's that many theories. As far as I knew, reading all the other Alfuzaic Nubia-specific empires, that they were born out of the Fazugli and sort of overtook and then expanded and did a whole bunch of things. But I like this argument. I hope you, as our newest Funj scholar, can help satisfy the actual beginning of the empire. That's fascinating. Nubia is a really interesting case study. Most people don't consider Sudan as part of the Middle East, North Africa region. I and Alfuzaic very much do. They speak Arabic. I mean, their name literally means the land of black people, is literally what Sudan means in Arabic. So like it's very much a part of this history. And I think the Nubian empires, in their connection with Egypt, as well as a bridge to Ethiopia and the rest of Central Southern Africa, is very much a transitional connection point historically, geographically, and more. So that's exactly why Nubia is included. Thank you, Andy, for talking about the Funj and finishing our Nubian historical empire review. Because more or less after this, Ottomans took over, then all the other major Islamic empires, and then now it's Sudan. So this is really the end of the long empires, and it's just interesting to hear that even their origins are a bit murky, when I think they're probably the most well-known modern, most recent, I guess, empire from Nubia, not modern. So anyways, yeah, react to all those things. Tell us more cool facts about the Funj, Andy. This is a really cool article. Thank you. Is there, in your research, something that popped up that was really surprising or fascinating to you when learning about the Funj?
I mean, there are a couple things. I guess to keep on the theme of the power dynamics, one of the things that comes up is how the Funj negotiate the different powers in the region. So, I mean, one thing that historians are surprised about is the fact that like the Funj are Muslim. So the first thought is, why don't they ally with the Ottomans, who are also Muslim and interested in spreading Islam? Like that seems like a pretty obvious connection. But the Funj make a calculation that actually it makes more sense for us to ally with the major Christian power in the region. And it's primarily for economic reasons. Ethiopia has basically the power over these like really important gold mines that are giving them a lot of prosperity, and Funj wants a piece of that pie. And so they ally themselves and kind of almost treat themselves as like a vassal of the Ethiopian empire, even if in their minds they're more powerful or they're not, fully committed to being subordinate. They sort of position themselves as subordinate to the Ethiopian empire in order to keep and maintain access to these gold mines, which give them a lot of wealth. At the same time, they're negotiating this relationship with the Ottoman Empire. Depending on like where the Ottoman Empire is and who's in power, there are different levels of desire in taking over the Funj, but there's always been the desire to take them over just because of where they're positioned on the Blue Nile is like a very prime spot, and it would give them sort of this access to Nubia and areas that they could take over. They're also like doing good in terms of being on the Nile, in terms of just being at a flourishing location. So the location is very appealing to the Ottomans. And so there was a really interesting attempt where they tried to just take boats over the Third Cataract. And if you know anything about the Nile cataracts, they're just like these giant rock structures. And like, so the fact that they didn't realize that their boats crashed, people died, like, and some of the things that historians say is that the Ottomans really underestimated, number one, like just reaching the Funj Empire, and then they underestimated the Funj themselves. Some of the things that the Funj did, like, so the Ottomans had a lot of kind of smaller territories that were kind of in radius of the Funj, and so the Funj had the ability to sort of turn off their water supply and turn off their communications in retaliation to sort of Ottoman aggression. And there wasn't too much that the Ottomans could do about it. So there's just this like shaky ground of sort of like, we're all trying to stay in our lanes, but we're also trying to be allies, but I'm also trying to dominate you secretly. The Ottomans actually took over a settlement pretty close to the Funj in a really aggressive way. Like everybody knew that they're getting close to them in order to like be able to take them over, but they're also not trying to say that out loud. So it's just this very interesting sort of ongoing tension between these powers of like, nobody's really happy and everyone kind of sees each other as enemies, but also we have this alliance because of economic reasons. Yeah.
That is absolutely fascinating. I've never, like, I think that you're so right when you speak about the power dynamics. It's like there was dynamic. I mean, there was something permanently going on there. And that's really like, it's interesting to think about because, usually what we see is like either complete like invasion, like complete, like, I'm going to take you over, or like, what, I just want my little empire in my area. And then, I don't want to mess with anyone. So it's really interesting to think about how they could just like kind of like on the low, as we say nowadays, that they were trying to sort of say like, we could dominate you if we wanted to. I think that was that idea of them. It's like, if we wanted to, we could try, but we're just not trying. So like, we're just letting you know that there is power there. So, but definitely not like a struggle for neither of the three, they still kind of had like, according to what you're saying, they still kind of had this economic benefit, and they still had this sort of like a structure formed, and they were still successful in this parts. And I think that When it comes to location, I think, yeah, it was definitely very strategic. And of course wanted. So I wonder, like, also, what it was like for them to rule, kind of like what their system, or like in the section of like the ruling system, like what was that like, and like how did they like obtain not just economics from like the idea of being allied to like with the Ethiopians, but also like what else did they install, and like how else were their sort of like their politics of the Funj?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say so. The sort of ideology of their system, kind of the way that it's explained is in Arabic for them, is like there's Dar al-Harb, which is the house of war, and then Dar al-Islam, which is the house of Islam. And so for them, everything that was in their radius is the house of Islam. So it's sort of civilized territories, things that are in their influence. And the idea is to go to all the places of wars, everything outside of their sphere of influence, and sort of bring those areas into their sphere of influence. And so they instituted this system of provincial rulers. And so all of the provincial rulers were subordinate to the Sultanate, who was based at Sennar in the capital. And the provincial rulers sort of managed the sort of outskirts of the empire that were sort of outside of the capital city. And one of the things that was important is that you want to be in the Sultan's good graces, because part of allying, if you're a lot of these were like smaller tribes who became provincial leaders. And one of the things you want to do is stay in the Sultan's good graces, so you can also get access to that gold trade, and also access to this really flourishing slave trade. And so the provincial rulers would come to the sort of Sultan's court and sort of talk him up, give him gifts, make him feel happy. And there was also a lot of tribute that was involved. So that's also part of where the capital's wealth came from. And that's also part of how they were able to manage their empire sort of on the outskirts. I think another thing that they did had to do with their judicial system. So at the time that this is happening, like, they're wealthy because of gold. They're also like managing a pretty large slave trade. This is also part of the reason they still kind of have alliance with the Ottomans, because the slave routes go up to Egypt. And so Egypt needs the slave routes to continue. So they do need to have some kind of positive contact with the Funj. And so because of the slave trade that's happening, a lot of these foreign merchants just like create a community in the capital, and they like establish themselves there so they can kind of be where the action is. And so the Funj kind of realize, all right, the royal law that we have can't really apply to these foreigners, but we need some way of managing them so all chaos doesn't break loose. So what they do is they're really the first to sort of institute the system of like Islamic law and Islamic judges. And so the judges in the Islamic judicial system are kind of in charge of the foreign merchants, and then the royal law is for like Funj citizens. This becomes a problem because then you have two competing legal systems, and you also have two competing authorities, because the Sultan is the one who appoints the most principal judge, and the two begin to like compete for power. So the Sultan is trying to like have more judicial power than the primary judge. And so like that system starts to crumble because of those competing. Actually, that's the whole theme of this, is that competing power is really what destroys them in the end. So that's kind of what they have a commercial way of organizing themselves, or a way of organizing themselves through the provincial leaders, establishing this system of tribute and subordination, but then also a legal way of organizing all the different people who are just like physically in their presence.
Really fascinating. I think what was interesting to sort of chat about is that this empire, 1500 to 1821, right? A lot of these empires we talked about are BCE, thousands of years ago. And so some of these revolutionary differences in their judicial system, their religious system, the way that they were able to shut off the water to the Ottoman Empire, I want to get back to that. It's a wild story. I think is a testament to their like time, as in that was still 300 plus years ago from today, but not 3,000 plus years ago, like some of these empires, especially in Nubia that we've chatted about before. So I think that's just something to remind everyone as we're having this conversation, is like, yes, this is an ancient Sultanate empire, but it's, only a couple generations ago. It's not thousands and thousands of years ago. But back to the point of the judicial, squabbles, I guess for lack of a more appropriate term, that's pretty unique in most of any of these other empires. Usually it's full conquest or lack of funds or trading or an invading army or a slave rebellion has ended these empires, and seemingly this is a legal judicial issue. I know that's not the only reason the Funj ended, but the beginning of the cracks of the society began judicially. I think that's really fascinating, and may even be an indicator to modern Sudanese politics, given all the other components with their modern judges. I'm making a big leap here, but there is some history. That's interesting. Do you have more about, I want to go back a little bit to them shutting off the water. That's such a fascinating sentence that if you have any more details.
Not really. It's more so that just because of their strategic placement, they were the ones who controlled that resource. And so they just made it very clear at certain points that we can do this, we will do this. But at the same time, there were also other, again, sort of smaller Ottoman territories. Part of the reason they wanted to take over the Funj is that their smaller territories were costing them a lot to upkeep. It was very expensive for them, and they weren't getting a lot of value out of these territories besides just saying that they had them. And so some of those territories were very much in the Funj's orbit, and the Funj very much could have just taken them out. But because they're trying to maintain this, this little dance, they would do in one sentence, they would shut off the water and shut off the communications. But at another time, they're letting these other smaller things, territories of the Ottoman Empire, they just let them be when they very much could have easily absorbed them. And so they're constantly doing this sort of calculation of I'm going to stop you from stepping too far, but I'm also going to kind of let you live. And so I think the water is part of it. Not only are they shutting off water, they're also giving them some leeway in order to sort of maintain this kind of rickety balance.
Just to follow up real quick before Anna's question, when you say shutting off water, do you mean putting a dam on the Nile, or was it something more extensive? I'm just the actual act of shutting off the water is so fascinating to me, and especially in a water poor region. I was just curious, did they build makeshift dams on the Nile or something, or stop?
I'm actually not certain. I think it has more to do with irrigation and agriculture, but I'm not super sure. Actually.
No, I will read it's more my own. That's just an interesting sentence I've never heard of before. Yeah, wow, thank you. I'm excited to learn more. Anna, go for it with your question.
No, that was honestly very interesting, because even to think about it, just sounds like a really sophisticated way to kind of handle politics. And it looks like the Funj Sultanate, this was their specialty, to kind of we're not opposing you or agreeing with you, but we're just going to kind of send you messages, which I don't know. I mean, when I think about it, and I think about what Ben said about it not being ancient old, being just a couple of generations ago, there's a lot of similarities to how some of certain and not empires but governments function today. And it makes me believe that they did have some type of influence and in the region and in sort of the world and in the way that it's handled. But I did have another question, which was I kept thinking about who was there before the Funj Sultanate, in this area, because you're saying that the Ottomans, were occupying some of these territories that they could have easily handled on their own, but then they decided not to, which is really strategic politics, I would call it. But at the same time, so then, was the Ottoman there? Were the Ethiopians there? Or was this kind of like a non-claimed area where they were? That was my second question. But yeah.
Yeah, so most historians sort of suggest that the Christian kingdom of Alwa, I think it has another name in Arabic, sort of as it was declining, the Funj were rising. And that's part of the reason that some more modern historians are saying it doesn't make sense that the Funj came out of nowhere or immigrated from Borneo or from Abyssinia. It makes more sense that they were somehow native to the region. But again, historians have not confirmed that. But essentially the idea is that as that Christian kingdom was declining, the Funj sort of, it was kind of more of a perfect timing scenario that they were able to get in before the Ottomans were able to make their move. Because remember that the Ottomans are also like primarily based in Egypt, which is like some hours away. You have to think about like how long it takes caravan routes to get there. So even if the Ottomans had moved immediately, like the Funj were just quicker, and to be able to amass all their resources. Like I said, the territories that they had were so small and were not very beneficial that like the ones that were closest to the area really weren't like in the position to sort of take over that area and claim it for the Ottomans. So I think it primarily just had to do with good timing.
Yeah, and to answer that question a bit more, on Al-Fuzayk's website, we have 5 Nubian empires. The ones that in the Funj area are Fazugli and Alodia is the English word. But,
oh, yeah, yep.
But there's also the Makuria and the Nobadia. All along the Nile, as you sort of work your way up, the very windy river has different sections of Nubia. The Blue Nile, which is where Funj is specifically, was also Fazugli and Alodia. Makuria and Nobatia were more northern. I'll see if I can get a map and share it on my screen if that helps. But yeah, what's so fascinating about the Nile specific empires is they lived along the water route. That is it. And so talking about these land uses is entirely the reason I'm so fixated on shutting off the water is that's because that was the source of life literally for these empires. And so the fact that they were able to do that is fascinating. I Googled a bit and it looked like they stopped trading with water. Not necessarily building dams, but maybe they did both. I don't know. I'm still going to keep looking. So keep going on. I wanted to add that is that we have other articles on our site, and all 5 articles hyperlink to the other 4. So you can read one and learn about the other 4 through their history and timeline in that geographic region. Yeah, it's cool.
We're so happy for Al-Fuzayak. No, seriously, it's great. Like it kind of puts the map together. Like it really fills in those gaps. So that's a good way.
Really quickly. So these are 3 of the 5: Nobatia, Makuria, and Alodia.
Oh yeah, I remember.
Alodia became Fazugli, and then Fazugli became the Funj. So still the sort of southern part. Sinar is like right where my not magnifying glass, I guess it is. Right underneath Soba is where Sinar is. Soba is right basically where Khartoum, the modern capital of Sudan, is. Khartoum is like right here. So this southern part. And then Ethiopia is like right here, if you can see my mouse on the screen. And then Egypt, of course, is here up. So those are those main 3, and then Fazugli and Funj are both in this area, if that helps. Okay.
Yeah, that it really does. No, that's absolutely great. Like, it really puts it, like I said, and like draws the picture. And I think I remember the Nobatia now that you mentioned it. I do remember that one. So yeah, it was a bit higher up. But yeah, no, I was just because I'm always like into really like understanding the political systems and the way that it worked several generations ago, and it makes me obviously think about it and compare it to like how some of these countries they follow certain, like sometimes similar kind of like governing systems. So I guess I always go for that question of like what was it that like what was the ruling system like, and if it did have any type of modern influence in this area today. So but of course sometimes there's not like a clear answer to that question, but the modern influence section sometimes does have other type of influences that are not political, that are not related to government. So if you want to talk about that, totally tell us more.
Yeah, I can add to that. So I think one thing in terms of influences, like the Funj Empire Sultanate was very well known as like a cosmopolitan place. Part of that is because of so many foreign merchants, living in the capital and conducting business there. Part of it is the fact that the caravan routes are going sort of up and down North Africa, so you're getting a lot of exposure to people, and the fact that like a lot of sort of religious scholars travel to other parts where Islam is really prominent. They join a lot of important religious meetings, and so they get influenced by those other Islamic powers, but they also are slowly building the Funj reputation as like a real legitimate Islamic power. And so there are all of those cosmopolitan ideas happening, and even the Funj is like noted as like a safe haven for kind of all sorts of misfits. Like there was even a comment that like wizards who were escaping persecution could just like hang out and be free in the capital of Sennar. So they were just a very open people in terms of like letting people who in other societies were not welcome, like the Funj were welcoming them and were slowly getting their influence. And so that's certainly a part of kind of how things came together. I would also say in terms of, I'm also thinking in terms of like going back to the judicial system, part of, because you mentioned modern influence, so, or the fact that they're not as old, like not thousands of years old. So one of the things that happens that is not 1,000 years old is the fact that there's coin money. Coin money begins to be part of how transactions are happening. And this is important because that is part of what allows this Islamic judiciary system to make some of these innovations. So there's one of the first societies to implement fines. So instead of like an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth kind of sentencing, right? Or instead of having people thrown in prison or having people face the capital punishment, though that still did happen, they're starting to institute fines, right? You steal and you have to pay a certain amount of, and that's only possible because coin money is a thing. There's also an issue of like the judges not being universally popular because each of the judges would take a cut of that fine. And so they were accused of corruption, which is part of the reason why they start to lose their grip on power and why like there's the Sultan judge conflict. And as that conflict is happening, the Sudanese merchant class is growing in influence, growing in power. And so they start to sort of take over where the judges and the Sultanate are failing. Religious leaders are, this is also part of why Islam spreads so effectively, because as this kind of internal turmoil is taking place, and especially once the coups and secession wars start happening, the religious leaders come in and provide the services that are no longer being provided by the judiciary or the royal courts. And so people are like really into Islam now because it's the religious leaders who are providing them with services while the court is busy, you know, fighting amongst itself. So that's also part of their modern influence because Islam is still very much present in the region today.
Wow. Okay, wait 1 sec. I just want to say, was that like an introduction at like diversity of them like starting to kind of accept everyone? Like what you said at the beginning portion of this last answer. I mean, it sounded pretty much to me like a first attempt of what diversity can look like. You know, it doesn't matter what you think. It doesn't matter how crazy your thoughts are, your beliefs are, whatever, we accept you. The Funj Sultanate is here to support you. I love that. I absolutely love that.
I hope so. That sounds fabulous. Yeah, and like an inclusion, pay your taxes, but you can still live here kind of perspective. Interesting. That's not the only empire that's done it that way, especially on religious lenses. Like it doesn't matter what religion you are, as long as you pay our tax, live your life. That's actually an Islamic jizya tax is what that is. That is fascinating. Yeah. Okay. Good job, Funj. Good to know. I'm super interested because again, this was only really 200-300 years ago that as they ended. Is there any like structures, you know, mosques, I'm assuming, or something that was built that is still standing today out of curiosity? Do you know?
That's a good question. I would assume not, just because the fact that they were conquered by Muhammad Ali and he went in with two goals. One, to take over the gold mines, and two, to acquire slaves for his army. And so there are a couple different types of slaves that were a part of the slave trade in the Funj Sultanate. One of those are kind of like the domestic type slaves in the homes. Another type were slaves that were used by the provincial rulers. So they actually would have slaves to help actually manage their affairs. Like they were considered very loyal and considered very skillful. And so they were in these high positions helping the provincial rulers manage their estates. And then the third type of slaves are slaves who were used in armies. And so it sounds like he just went in and kind of decimated things, but I'm actually not super sure about that.
It's a pretty typical reaction when another empire conquers another one. There's less left. I was just curious since it was more recent if there's anything. All good if not.
I would say can I add to that? I'd say one thing that is still present, like physically, are these sort of tombs of like Muslim, they would be called saints at this point, but as I mentioned, like the big movement of like Islamic scholars in the country, a lot of those scholars became saints, and Sudanese people today visit those graves kind of as part of their annual pilgrimage. So a lot of those things are still there.
That is the featured image of Funj is.
Oh, perfect.
It's the Kubba is the. I'll share my screen again. This is the featured image of the Funj. So I was just curious if there was other things, but yeah, here is. These like little huts are like tombs, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Anna, any final questions you have for Andy as we wrap up?
No, definitely, that was very cool, and I was thinking of that too, because usually there is some type of structure, but I'm glad that there's still something there left of them and that we know about it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, like, no, I mean, if you found anything cool, and any final thoughts or just kind of like something that comes up to your mind about Funj that we haven't talked about, please tell us.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really interesting project for me. I have had experience in Egypt twice in summer 2015 and 2016. So this project gave me a way of kind of understanding a different part of Egyptian history while also understanding some of the societies that existed kind of concurrently with them. Whereas I may have not had the time or the energy or the opportunity to sort of delve into that. So I really appreciated that part of this project. And it's interesting today to think, because I think at the beginning, Ben mentioned the fact that like Sudan is not always considered an Arab Muslim country. So it's so interesting to me to see how like they're responsible for the spread of Islam in this region. And yet in the modern times, there is such an argument or such a dismissal of Sudanese as part of the larger Arab Muslim community. So I think that maybe if people knew more about this history, there would be less arguments about that and more respect for what Sudanese have contributed to that religious community at large.
That entire reaction is more or less the impetus for Al-Fuzaiq in the first place. Not just Sudan, but that is part of it. There is a lot of misunderstandings and stereotypes against this region of the world, and I am not from that region, but I have a huge appreciation, as does Megan, and we wanted to create a space where people could chat, learn, engage, showcase, educate, cultivate, and more. So part of that is inclusion of the entirety of the region and its history and its empires, hence Civilization 101. You're one of the very last empires left on our full list as well. So we're ending on a high note, very high note. For basically saying Al-Fuzaiq's mission statement in of itself. So we appreciate it.
I was impressed.
Hey, it's okay. We're happy you're here. That's why you're part of our community. Well, yeah, so as Andy just mentioned, the reason we do all of these conversations, these like talkbacks, these articles is to showcase there's a lot more going on in this region than you think about, and to adequately showcase, subscribe to, understand, learn all of these history. That's why there's all these hyperlinks. That's why these empires talk to one another, because they did in real life. So they showed it in all these articles. So again, thank you, Andy, for writing this fabulous article on this very crucial Nubian Sudanese empire. Anna, as always, your insights are the best and very appreciated and make this conversation so seamless. And to you, our listeners, for reading and engaging and listening, please make sure to go to the actual website, alfuzaiq.net, and scroll to the Funj section of Civilization 101, Funj, so you can learn even more about all of these fabulous insights. And click to all the other empires. The other 4 Nubians are just as fascinating. Thank you again for engaging with us, for your time, and Anna and Andy. There we go. And for connecting with this fabulous conversation. Well, any final things you'd like to say, Andy, before we wrap up?
No, thanks for this opportunity. I had fun.
Yeah, me too. Well, thank you all so much. We will end here. Have a nice rest of your day and enjoy learning. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.